They tell you grief comes in 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. It's a neat little roadmap for the absolute mess of losing someone. For me, grief didn't come in 5 stages. It came in a set of 3 cheap spiral-bound notebooks I found taped to the bottom of Sophie's hope chest. You know, the one she kept at the foot of our bed, filled with our daughter's first booties and old anniversary cards. It smelled of cedar and a lie that spanned 15 years. My wife, my beautiful, radiant Sophie, was a planner. She scheduled our vacations a year in advance, meal prepped on Sundays, and apparently cataloged her infidelities with the meticulousness of a librarian. I sat there on our perfectly vacuumed beige carpet, the air still thick with the ghost of her Chanel No. 5, and read. At first, my brain just refused to process it. It was like reading a very poorly written, very repetitive erotic novel. Name, date, a brief, sometimes disappointingly clinical description of the event. A real bummer. It wasn't until I saw the sheer volume, entries dating back to when our oldest, Lily, was still in diapers, that the numbness started to recede, replaced by something cold and heavy, like a block of dry ice in my gut. I wasn't the protagonist in a love story. I was the unwitting benefactor in a long-running, independently funded grant program for her hobbies. Hundreds of names. Some were just initials. J from accounting. The barista with the neck tattoo. That dad from Maya's soccer team. It was almost comical. I felt less like a betrayed husband and more like a guy who'd been unknowingly funding a small, incredibly prolific charity. What a generous soul I was. Then I got to an entry from last fall. It wasn't the details about some CrossFit jerk named Trevor that made my blood run cold. It was the postscript. Had to cut it short. Lily called. Said Dad was on his way home from a hardware store. That girl is a lifesaver. So much better at this than Maya, who still gets all nervous. She'll learn. And there it was. The twist of the knife I never saw coming. It wasn't just that she cheated on me. That's a tale as old as time. It's that she'd made my daughters, our daughters, co-conspirators. Little accessories to her grand deception. All those times Lily, my sweet Lily, would call me at work. Just checking on you, Daddy. Was she running interference? Was my entire life a carefully choreographed stage play where I was the only one who didn't have the script? The manicured green lawn outside my window, the one I spent every Saturday perfecting, suddenly looked like a plastic prop. It was a perfect green, sprawling lie. That night, watching my girls do their homework at the kitchen island, their laughter echoing in the too quiet house, a thought took root, a nasty, invasive little weed in the ruined garden of my mind. It was a simple question, really, a matter of biological certainty in a life that had suddenly become anything but. The decision was cold, logical, and immediate. There was no rage, no shouting. That would come later. This was about data collection, establishing a baseline. Screw it. If my life was a sham, I want to know just how deep the rot went. 2 days later, a small, discreet box from an ancestry lab arrived. Just a fun family tree project, I told them, swabbing the insides of their cheeks while they rolled their eyes at their dad's weird new hobby. They had no idea. Or maybe they did. That's the messed up part, isn't it? I could no longer tell innocence from a well-rehearsed performance. For 2 weeks, I functioned on autopilot. Work, cook dinner, feign interest in their TikTok dramas, and wait. The world outside kept moving, but my life was paused, hanging on a single, pivotal point of data. And then this morning, sitting in my car in a deserted corner of a Target parking lot, my phone buzzed. An email. The subject line was chillingly simple. Your results are in... I stare at it for a full 5 minutes. The screen's glow illuminating a man I no longer recognized. My whole world, my entire identity as a father, was balanced on the head of a pin, and I was about to find out if it was real. My thumb hovered over the link in the email, a millimeter of flesh separating my old life from whatever fresh hell was waiting on the other side. A digital Pandora's box, sent with a cheerful, automated, "Thanks for using 23andMe. Bummer. You'd think for this price, you'd at least get a personalized harbinger of doom. with a breath that felt stolen from a future self. I tapped the screen. The page loaded. 2 names. 2 tidy, clinical-looking PDF files. I clicked on Lily's first. Lillian Grace Miller. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. A wave of relief, so intense it felt like nausea washed over me. For a split second, I almost laughed. Maybe the journals were a lie. Maybe it was some twisted fiction she wrote. A weird creative outlet. Maybe she wasn't a monster after all. Just a wannabe novelist with a lame gimmick. Hope, it turns out, is a remarkably resilient weed. Then I opened the second file. Maya and Miller. Probability of paternity, 0%. The number just sat there. 0. A perfect, unapologetic circle. Not a fraction, not a margin of error. Just a flat, digital negation of my entire world. It wasn't a gut punch. It was a silent, clean, surgical removal of something I never even knew was a vital organ. The Texas sun beat down on the windshield, but I felt nothing but ice in my veins. A strange, hollow chuckle escaped my lips. It started low, then grew into a full-blown, silent, tearless laugh that shook my whole body. Well played, Sophie. Well played. You absolute artist. Of course this would be the twist. My daughter, the one you corrupted, the one you made your little lookout. She was mine. The blood of your accomplice runs through my veins. But Maya, sweet, anxious Maya, who cried for a week when her hamster died, the one you noted was nervous about the lies? She was a stranger, and cuckoo's egg laid in my nest. Sophie hadn't just cheated. She had curated a family, cast it, and directed it, leaving me with the one child who would forever be a living testament to her betrayal, bonded to me by blood, and the other, an innocent girl whose very existence was the anchor of that betrayal. It was diabolically brilliant, a masterpiece of psychological warfare. You don't just win the game, you salt the earth so nothing can ever grow there again. Shoot. My phone buzzed. A picture of our family, the 4 of us smiling on a beach in Florida last year, lit up the screen. Sophie looked a little thin. The first signs of the illness were there. But she was smiling, her head on my shoulder. Lily and Maya were making goofy faces. We looked happy. What a joke. The picture wasn't memory. It was a piece of propaganda. My gaze drifted to Maya. Her eyes. They weren't mine and they weren't Sophie's. Whose were they? I found myself scrolling through the contacts on my phone, then stopping. I didn't have to know the name. It didn't matter which one of the hundreds of ghosts from her journals was the lucky winner. The damage was the same. The result was her, an innocent girl asleep in a house I no longer felt was mine. This changes things. The quiet, dignified grief I was supposed to be performing for the world, that's over. That man, the sad widower from the suburbs, died in this parking lot. What's left is something else. Something colder, clearer. The journals were Act 1. The DNA test was the intermission. Now, Act 2 is about to begin. Her family, her sainted mother who always looked down her nose at my public school education, her blowhard brother who saw Sophie as a fragile angel. They enabled her. They built the pedestal she performed on. They worshipped the false idol she created. So, who better to share this revelation with? My car's air conditioner hummed, the only sound beside my own breathing. The recycled air smelled sterile, like the lab report itself. There's no script for this. Do I blow up Maya's world? How can I look at her the same way? Can I still love her? God, what a mess. But one thing became clear. The burden of this truth was not going to be mine alone to carry. Sophie wanted her secrets kept. She used our children to do it. But secrets, like bodies, Dante stayed buried forever. And I was done being the silent caretaker of her perfect porcelain image. I put the car in drive, a sense of chilling purpose settling over me. I wasn't driving home. Not yet. I had a phone call to make, a family meeting to arrange. It was time for Sophie's biggest fans to meet the real her. Let's see how they feel about their saint when they find out she wasn't just a sinner, but a con artist who left an innocent child in her wake. The quiet little funeral home memorial was over. I was about to host my own, an exclusive, invitation-only affair. And I had one hell of an exhibit to unveil. Driving to Eleanor's house felt like a dress rehearsal for a war. You practice your moves, anticipate their defense, but you can't know the outcome until the lights are up. I gripped the cheap, pebbled plastic of the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My hand was steady, though. Funny, the things you learn about yourself when your life goes up in flames. Turns out I'm a pretty good actor. The phone call was a masterclass in feigned fragility. My voice was pitched just right, a perfect blend of a heartbroken widower and a dutiful son-in-law. Eleanor, it's Dylan. I was going through some of Sophie's things. I found something. I think you and Mark should see it. In person. Her house smelled exactly as I knew it would. Potpourri, lemon pledge, and a suffocating sense of self-righteousness. It was less a home and more a museum curated in Sophie's honor. And there she was, the centerpiece of the main exhibit, smiling down from a giant, gilt-framed portrait over the mantelpiece. Saint Sophie, the martyr. Taken 5 years ago, pre-cancer, pre-revelation. Back when I thought her biggest flaw was loading the dishwasher incorrectly. Eleanor and Mark were seated on the pristine cream sofa, their faces arranged into masks of practiced sorrow. Grief theater at its finest. Eleanor, Sophie's mother, a woman who measured worth in property values and country club memberships. Mark, her older brother, a perpetually disappointed real estate agent who still talked about his high school football days. They looked at me with the kind of pity you'd reserve for a stray dog. A lame one. Dylan, thank you for coming, Eleanor said, her voice like fine crystal being scraped with a fork. We've been so worried. Are you eating? Was I eating? Seriously? I nodded, forcing a weak smile. I'm managing. This is difficult. Understatement of the century. We went through the motions, the hollow pleasantries, the weak coffee served in cups too delicate for human hands. They recounted stories of Sophie's childhood benevolence, how she'd once rescued a baby bird. I wondered if she'd documented its species in a notebook somewhere. It was like they were collectively building a monument to a woman who never existed. The air was thick with the hum of the refrigerator and unspoken platitudes. This wasn't a family grieving. It was a PR firm trying to control a narrative. My narrative. I finally set my cup down with a soft, deliberate clink. I didn't come here to talk about birds, Eleanor. The shift in tone caught them off guard. Mark sat up a little straighter, his protective big brother instincts, which I now realized were just proprietary, kicking in. What is it, Dylan? You're being dramatic. Am I? I let the question hang in the air. I found her journals. 2 words. That's all it took. 2 words to shatter the holy silence. Eleanor's face tightened. Her diaries? Dylan, you shouldn't have read those. A woman's private thoughts are her own. Oh, I think after 15 years of marriage, I had some right to them. I said, my voice colder than I intended, especially since my name is in them. A lot. And so are about 200 others. Man, that is... There it was. Out. Not yelled, just stated. A fact, delivered like a weather report. Mark scoffed. A short, ugly sound. What the heck are you talking about? You're not making any sense. You're grieving, you're confused. He's lashing out, Eleanor interjected. Her gaze flinty. She stood up, turned to face the portrait of her daughter, as if drawing strength from a lie. Sophie loved you. She was a good wife, a good mother. To suggest anything else it's despicable. It's an insult to her memory. So this was their move. The grief-crazed husband defense. It was predictable, but the sheer speed of their denial was impressive. They weren't defending her. They were defending their own investment in her perfection. My supposed partners in grief had just revealed themselves as the guardians of the fraud. This wasn't going to be a simple presentation of facts. This was an intervention, and I was the one being cast as the patient. A jerk, spinning vile fantasies. My hands were balled into fists in my pockets. So, words aren't enough. Got it. Plan B. You're right, I said quietly. Their expressions softened, thinking they'd won. Thinking I'd collapse back into my assigned role of the pathetic widower. Words are an insult. You need something more concrete, more scientific. I pulled the folded envelope from my jacket pocket and placed it on the polished mahogany coffee table between us. It landed with a soft, final thud. They both stared at it. A plain business envelope. Suddenly the most menacing object in the room. "What is this?" Mark asked, his voice wary. I looked from him to Eleanor, then up at the smiling portrait of my wife. A strange calm washed over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just a messenger of a truth that was about to burn their entire world to the ground. "It's not about the affairs," I said, my voice level. "Not really. That's just the start of the story. I tapped the envelope. "This is about Maya." For a long moment, no one moved. The white business envelope sat on the dark wood of the coffee table, like a surrender flag, in a war no one else knew was being fought. The portrait of Sophie over the mantel seemed to smirk, her painted eyes full of secrets. Eleanor stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake, poised to strike. Mark, ever the man of action, recovered first. His face was a thundercloud of confusion and indignation. "Maya? What the heck does this have to do with Maya?" he snapped, his hand darting out to grab the envelope. My own hand shot out, not touching his, but pressing down firmly on the envelope. "Aha! Not yet," I said, my voice low and even. Our eyes locked. I had him. For the first time in 15 years of being the vaguely disappointing son-in-law, I had his full, undivided attention. It was exhilarating. "We're not going to be rash. We're going to be calm and adult about this, like you're always telling me to be." Eleanor rose from the sofa, her posture rigid. She looked a decade older than she had 5 minutes ago. "Dylan, stop this. Stop this game right now. If there's something wrong with Maya, if she's in some kind of trouble, you need to tell us." "Oh, something's wrong," I agreed, letting a sliver of the truth slip through. "But it's not a kind of trouble you can fix by throwing money at it. And it's not a game." I let my gaze sweep over their anxious faces. The journals were just the appetizer. An unpleasant, rather sordid appetizer, I grant you. But this is the main course. I lifted my hand off the envelope. It's a copy of a DNA test result. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the faint, elegant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking time in a house where time had just stopped. Their brains, I could see them working, gears grinding, trying to process the non sequitur. DNA test? Sophie? Maya? The pieces weren't fitting, because the puzzle they were trying to solve was of a world that didn't exist. With a shaking hand, Eleanor picked up the envelope. Her manicured nails trembled as she fumbled with the flap. She slid out the single, folded piece of paper. The clinical font, the sterile table of data, the finality of that number. 0%. She read it once. Then she read it again. Her face, a carefully maintained mask of upper-middle-class composure, just collapsed. It went slack, the color draining from it, until it was the same shade as her cream-colored sofa. The paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. Mark snatched it up. He read it in 2 seconds. His face went from white to a dangerous, blotchy red. "No," he breathed. A single word of absolute denial. He looked at me, his eyes wild. "No, this is fake. You faked this. This is some kind of sick, twisted joke. You jerk. You're trying to slander her. You're trying to ruin her name." "Is that your first thought?" I asked, genuinely curious. Not, "Oh my God, that poor little girl?" Not, "My sister lied for a decade?" No. Your first instinct is that I've committed fraud to besmirch the sainted memory of a woman who was playing you all for fools. The tick-tock of the clock suddenly sounded impossibly loud, a metronome counting down to my next move. Sophie played the long game. She left me a parting gift, an emotional landmine, a child who isn't mine. And then came the moment that changed everything, the twist that proved this was never about love or family. This was about status, legacy, control. Eleanor, a woman who just discovered her granddaughter was not her granddaughter, that her sainted daughter had constructed an epic lie. Looked me dead in the eye. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, stripped of all its polished charm. It was raw, ugly, and utterly selfish. "Who else knows about this?" Not, "Is Maya okay?" Not, How are you holding up? Just who knows? It was a question of containment, a problem of public relations. In that moment, staring into her cold, panicked eyes, I realized they were not victims of Sophie's lies. They were her co-conspirators, even if they never knew the details. They had built and maintained the pedestal of perfection she stood on, and they would do anything to keep it from crumbling. Even if an innocent child and the man they called family were crushed beneath it. Mark took his cue from his mother. We have to fix this. We can get a lawyer. This information can't get out. It would destroy this family's reputation. The family's reputation? I almost laughed. It was all so lame, so pathetically predictable. The house is already on fire, Mark, and you're worried about the curb appeal. I stood up. I finally understood. The journals weren't just about Sophie. They were a symptom of a deeper sickness. A sickness of image over substance, of legacy over love. And these two were the primary carriers. Eleanor got to her feet, her composure starting to reassemble itself into a new, harder shape. "This is your fault," she hissed, her finger pointing at me. Trembling with fury. "You and your digging. Your obsession. If you had just let her rest in peace, none of us would have to know this ugliness. You brought this down on us." I looked at her, then at Mark, then up at the smiling lie on the wall. And for the first time since opening that email, I felt a sense of profound clarity. The path forward was crystal clear. She had just given me my mission. "You're absolutely right, Eleanor," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I did dig. I unearthed this ugliness. And now, I think I'll see just how deep the roots of this perfect family go. Because a secret this big doesn't live in a vacuum. It had to be fed. It had to be protected. You think this is my mess to clean up? Oh no, this is our mess. And I'm just getting started." Leaving Eleanor's felt like stepping out of a sterile, climate-controlled mausoleum and back into the real world, where things decay and truths have consequences. Their reaction, that instant reptilian pivot to damage control, didn't even hurt. It clarified. It was like I'd spent 15 years trying to decipher a coded message, and they just handed me the key. The code was simple: reputation over everything. Family wasn't a bond, it was a brand, and I had just tarnished it. I actually smiled on the drive home. Not a happy smile, just a smile of pure, unadulterated understanding. The house was eerily quiet when I got back. The girls were at a sleepover. For the first time, I was grateful for the silence, for the emptiness. The home didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt like a stage set after the show is closed, the props still in place, but the magic gone. My gaze fell on the hope chest at the foot of the bed. Cedar and lies. That was my new reality. Before, the journals were just a testament to Sophie's betrayal of me. Now I saw them as something more. They weren't just a diary. They were leverage, a roadmap to the rot. I spent the next 2 hours in a tedious, almost meditative state. Scanner humming. Coffee going cold next to me, I digitized every single page of her 3 notebooks. I couldn't risk the originals. Eleanor might misplace them for me. Once they were uploaded to a secure, password-protected cloud drive, I felt a shift in power. Sophie's secret life was no longer confined to cheap paper and her elegant, looping cursive. It was data now, searchable, analyzable. It was a weapon, and I was just starting to learn how to aim it. My first search was simple: a recurring name, a place, anything to find a pattern in the chaos of her indiscretions. The first few dozen entries were awash, a blur of business trips, soccer tournaments, book club meetings, a real social butterfly, my Sophie. But then, as I started cross-referencing the dates from her journal with our old bank statements, something popped. Not an expense, an income, or, more accurately, a transfer. January 17th. For years ago. Sophie's journal entry was brief. A dreary afternoon with M. Almost not worth the trouble. But the business is done. Feels so hollow afterwards. Had to wash the smell of his awful cologne off twice. It was sandwiched between a note about needing to buy new sneakers for Lily and a complaint about the school bake sale. Mundane. Except on January 18th. Our joint savings account shows a deposit. $5,000. No memo. Just a mobile deposit from a third-party check. I goofed. For years, I never checked the joint savings. That was her domain. My salary went into our checking for bills, and anything extra, I assumed she moved to savings for a rainy day. I just didn't realize she was creating the storms herself. Was it M? A payment for services rendered? It felt too transactional, even for Sophie. Still, my blood ran cold. Was she being blackmailed, or was this something else? I kept digging. I searched the journal for every entry that mentioned M. There were 12 over 3 years. And within 24 hours of 9 of those entries, a deposit appeared. Always a different amount. $5,000. $7,200. $4,500. It wasn't regular. It wasn't consistent. But it was a pattern. A dirty, ugly, unmistakable pattern. The symbol of my marriage, I decided, was the invisible ink she'd used to write her real-life story. I thought I was reading a gentle family novel, but I was living in a financial thriller. Who was M? Who paid my wife after these dreary afternoons? The name itself felt generic, deliberately vague. A single letter in a sea of indiscretion. But something about that last entry, the one about the awful cologne, snagged my attention. I remember that smell. A cloying, expensive mix of sandalwood and desperation. I'd smelled it at Christmas, at Thanksgiving. I'd smelled it in the funeral home just a few weeks ago. It was Mark, my brother-in-law, St. Sophie's big brother, the protector of her honor, the one who just called me a jerk for tarnishing her memory. A wave of dizziness hit me, so sharp and sudden I had to grip the edge of my desk. The room tilted. This wasn't secret infidelity with a stranger. This was a family business. What business was he conducting with his sister that resulted in thousands of dollars in off-the-books payments? My mind raced, trying to connect dots that shouldn't exist. Their family's real estate business. His constant complaints about being cash-strapped. Sophie's access to my financial information as a senior project manager for a major construction firm. Was this insider information? Was my perfect wife, the one Eleanor praised for her charity work, a corporate spy? And was her own brother her handler? My stomach twisted. It wasn't about sex. Maybe it never was. The affairs might have just been noise, a smokescreen to hide the real betrayal, the one that went far deeper than our marriage bed, a betrayal for profit. I leaned back in my chair, the fake leather creaking in the silence. This changes everything. My simple, sordid story of domestic betrayal had just gotten exponentially more complicated and a whole lot more dangerous. Because if Mark was paying his own sister for secrets from my job, then this isn't just a family squabble anymore. I'm not just an angry husband. I'm a witness. The world recalibrated. The puzzle I was trying to solve wasn't a flat, 100-piece jigsaw of a sad, broken heart. It was a 3D labyrinth with moving parts and hidden compartments. The affairs, the hundreds of meaningless encounters, suddenly felt like a sideshow, a magician's grand misdirection to keep the audience from seeing the real trick. Sophie wasn't just unfaithful. She was mining my life for intel, and her brother, Mark, wasn't just an obnoxious blowhard. He was her broker. My hands felt cold, my mind wired. It was 2 a.m, but sleep was a million miles away. My office, usually a sanctuary of order and predictable workflows, felt contaminated. I stared at the schematics for my current project pinned to a corkboard, a new multi-use development downtown, blueprints for buildings that stood for something solid, tangible. Had she photographed these? Scanned documents while I slept? Did she whisper proprietary information about bidding wars and material costs into Mark's ear over coffee? Was my entire career, the one thing I thought I'd built for myself, just another asset for her to liquidate? The whole thing was so deeply, profoundly lame. I started a new document on my computer, a spreadsheet, cold, clinical, organized. If their life was a business, I was going to conduct a forensic audit. Column A, date of journal entry mentioning M. Column B, date of deposit. Column C, deposit amount. Column D, my work calendar. The pattern was undeniable and terrifying. An entry about meeting him, on a Tuesday was followed by a deposit on Wednesday, and my calendar for that Monday showed a final stage bid submission for a lucrative city contract. Another dreary afternoon, and her journal lined up perfectly with a week when my company was finalizing a major land acquisition. Every single one of their meetings coincided with a critical, confidential phase of one of my projects. It was insider trading. Plain and simple. Morally and legally gray doesn't even cover it. This was a black hole, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The projects they profited from, projects I had poured my life into, were built on a foundation of lies originating from my own bedroom. My life wasn't just a sham. It was a crime scene. A ridiculously white-collar, nonviolent, pathetic crime scene. And Sophie, my radiant, dying Sophie, was not just a cheat. She was a goddamn corporate spy. And our family, my career, my home, was her cover. So, what does a man do with this kind of information? Go to the police? Tell my boss? Hi. Yeah. Turns out my dead wife was systematically stealing company secrets for her brother for years. My proof? Her secret sex diaries and some unmemoed bank deposits. No, I had no idea. I'd be a laughingstock before I was fired. My name would be toxic. They'd assume I wasn't on it. A classic case of blaming the chump. No, that wasn't the play. That would be their victory. The rage was gone now, replaced by something much colder, much heavier. It was a sense of profound, isolating responsibility. Maya's paternity was one bomb. This was a nuke. The first secret would destroy a family's reputation. This one would destroy their lives, their finances, their freedom. It would implode their precious family from the inside out. But it could also create massive splash damage. It could ruin my own career. It could taint Lily's future. And what about Maya? The innocent byproduct of one secret. Now caught in the wreckage of a much larger one. Can I protect her while burning them to the ground? The air in the house grew thick. Every familiar object now looked like a potential listening device, a silent witness. The smart speaker on the kitchen counter, the family laptop. Were they ever careless? Is there a digital footprint? A single text message? A poorly worded email? The symbolic object of this whole fiasco had to be my own smartphone, the device I used to manage my life, which she had apparently used to dismantle it. A modern Trojan horse I'd paid for myself on the family plan. My mind started working on a new kind of blueprint, not for a building of steel and glass, but for a meticulously constructed trap. Eleanor and Mark had made their priorities clear. Protect the brand, contain the damage. They thought the damage was a DNA result. They had no idea about the real rot in the foundations. They wanted to silence me, to manage me, to paint me as the unstable, grieving husband. Fine, I would play the part. For now, let them think they have me cornered. Let them get comfortable in their lies. I shut down my laptop. The dawn was beginning to break, painting the edges of the window with a faint gray light. My path forward was no longer about simple revenge for a broken heart. It was about leveraging one catastrophic secret to expose another. This was bigger than me. It was about the systemic hypocrisy they embodied, but it was also very, very personal. They thought the problem was me. They had no idea that I was about to become the solution. They wanted to bury a scandal. I was about to give them an avalanche. The question wasn't if I would use this information. The question was when and how to make it hurt the most. The following days were a masterclass in emotional camouflage. On the surface, I was a picture of a man wrestling with a terrible family secret. I let Lily see me staring into space. I made sure Maya caught me looking at old photo albums with a sad, wistful expression. To the outside world, and more importantly, to the spies I knew were watching, I was a man adrift in grief and confusion, a dog who'd been kicked and had retreated to his kennel to lick his wounds. Pathetic, perfect. The first volley came, as expected, via a text from Mark. Eleanor and I have been talking. We think it's best for everyone, especially the girls, if this unpleasantness stays private. We're family. We can sort this out. Let's have dinner this week. Our treat. Our treat. The casual condescension was almost artistic. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. They were ready to negotiate the terms of my silence. The scent of panic was faint, but I could smell it. mingled with that godawful cologne I now knew was a harbinger of a payout. "I don't know, Mark." I texted back, letting him wait an agonizing 2 hours for a reply. "I'm not sure I'm up for dinner. A lot on my mind." I was a fisherman, letting out the line. Let him take the bait. His reply was instantaneous. "It's important, Dylan, for Maya's future." The threat was veiled, but clear. They would use her, the one truly innocent party, as a bargaining chip. How utterly predictable, and how useful. "Okay," I texted back. Friday. This gave me 3 days. 3 days to move from forensic auditor to chief strategist. The digital copies of Sophie's journals were my scriptures of sin, and I studied them with religious devotion. My target was no longer the generic M. It was specifically Mark. I scoured her entries, looking for anything that could be weaponized, any personal detail, any hint of discord between them. And then I found it. It was a seemingly innocuous entry, almost poetic for Sophie, dated 2 years ago in the fall. Met M at the usual spot, the old observatory. He was agitated, smelling of cheap whiskey this time, not just bad cologne. He's underwater on that beach condo project, whining about how Dad always favored me. The usual sad sack monologue. It's almost a bummer how easy this is. It's like taking candy from a very stupid, very sweaty baby. The view of the city was nice, though. All the lights. It looked so clean from a distance. The old observatory. And the beach condo project. Jackpot. 2 concrete, verifiable details. A quick Google search confirmed Mark's Realty Group had a massive and notoriously troubled development down on the coast. A project that had miraculously secured a second round of funding right after a competitor bid had mysteriously fallen through. A bid my company had been a frontrunner for until our private cost analysis was somehow leaked. I remembered the late nights, the stress. I'd blamed a mole in my own company. Turns out the mole was sleeping next to me, but it was the observatory that really lit up my brain. It was a detail so specific, so useless to the insider trading plot, that it felt like a gift. It was a location, a stage. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was a clandestine meeting with atmosphere. It had symbolism. Her looking down on the clean city she was helping to corrupt. This was the pressure point. This was the detail I could use that proved I knew more than he thought I knew. I wasn't just guessing about the money. I knew where they stood while they made their dirty deals. My own plan started to form, a silent counter-narrative to their upcoming dinner script. I wasn't going to mention my job, the leaked bids, or insider trading. Not yet. That was my ace in the hole, and it was way too early to play it. My goal for this dinner was much simpler. I needed to shatter their perception of me as a grieving, malleable victim. I needed to reposition myself not as a problem they could manage, but as an existential threat. And to do that, I would use the one thing they couldn't deny. Sophie's own words. I felt a dark, exhilarating hum in my veins. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It had morphed into something purer. A quest for equilibrium. They had destabilized my entire world. Taken everything I thought was real and solid and turned it into sand. Now, it was my turn to shake their foundations. The upcoming dinner wasn't a negotiation. It was a psychological stress test. I was going armed with knowledge they thought was buried forever. The question I kept asking myself was no longer, can I do this? But how much damage am I willing to do? Because the real turn was coming. I was about to pivot from defense to offense. They thought they were containing a small family scandal. I was about to show them. They were trapped in the wreckage with me, and I was the one holding the map of all the exits. The restaurant they chose was perfect. If your goal is to intimidate someone with mahogany and aggressively priced seafood towers, it was the kind of place where the waiters don't walk, they glide, and the ambient noise is a gentle hum of quiet money. Eleanor and Mark were already there, seated in a plush, semicircular booth, looking like a royal couple holding court. A real power move. They stood when I approached, their faces etched with deep, counterfeit concern. It was like watching 2 hyenas try and convince a zebra they were vegan. "Dylan, we're so glad you came," Eleanor said, air kissing the space next to my cheek. She smelled of Chanel No. 5. The same perfume as Sophie. A deliberate, tactical choice. A sensory reminder of the woman whose memory they were here to cage. Shoot, it was both pathetic and brilliant. Mark, looking deeply uncomfortable in a tie, clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. Good to see you, man. How are you holding up? The question was a formality, like asking about the weather during a hurricane. The opening act was a nauseating performance of familial love. They asked about the girls. They reminisced about a long-ago family trip to Disneyland, conveniently editing out the part where Sophie and Mark got into a screaming match over their father's will. It was a carefully constructed fiction, and they were desperate for me to co-author it. I just nodded, gave one-word answers, and let the silence stretch until it was awkward. Let them do the work. Let them sweat under the warm, dim lighting. Mark ordered a bottle of wine, a ridiculously expensive Cabernet, without consulting the list. It wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was the opening bid. It was a liquid symbol of the world it occupied, a world where problems could be smoothed over with vintage and a healthy portfolio. I watched the sommelier pour the deep red liquid into my glass. The whole charade was a symbolic image of my life. A rich, appealing facade hiding a bitter, complicated truth. Finally, after the appetizers arrived, a smear of something on a tiny piece of toast. Eleanor leaned forward, her hands clasped on the white tablecloth. The show was over. The negotiation was beginning. "Dylan," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We've been thinking about this terrible situation, about what's best for Maya. And what have you concluded?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Her life must not be disrupted," Eleanor stated, as if issuing a papal decree. "She is a sweet, innocent girl. To have her world turned upside down by a mistake her mother made, would be unconscionable." She paused, her eyes locking onto mine. "We believe it is in everyone's best interest if this information remains strictly within this family. A terrible secret for us to bear, but bear it we must. For Maya." Mark cleared his throat. "What my mother is trying to say is, we want to help, to ensure Maya's future. We've spoken to our financial advisor. We want to set up a trust for her, a substantial one. We would manage it, of course, to guarantee her education, her future, her stability." There it was, the offer, quiet money, a bribe wrapped in the pretty paper concern. My silence in exchange for their control over the problem of Maya. They thought they were being so clever, so sophisticated. It was almost cute. I took a slow sip of the expensive wine. It tasted like blood and hubris. I set the glass down. "You know," I said, looking at a point somewhere over Mark's shoulder, "I was thinking about Sophie today, about the things she liked. She always did love a good view, didn't she? Always looking for a high place to see the whole city laid out." Eleanor blinked, confused by the non sequitur. Mark's posture tense. "Yeah," I continued, my voice conversational, almost wistful. "Like that old observatory you two used to go to. She wrote about it once. Said the city looked so clean from a distance. I always thought that was an interesting way to put it. It was a surgical strike. The reaction was instantaneous. Mark flinched as if he'd been tasered. His fork, which had been hovering over his plate, clattered onto the china with a sharp crack that turned heads at the next table. His face went pale. The confident real estate mogul vanished, replaced by the sweaty, stupid baby from Sophie's journal. Eleanor's eyes, however, turned to chips of ice. She knew, in that second, that they had fundamentally miscalculated. I hadn't just stumbled upon the affair. I'd found the receipts. I hadn't just discovered the what. I knew the where. Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, to salvage the situation, but Mark, in a spasm of pure panic, goofed big time. He blurted out the one thing he absolutely shouldn't have. "What do you want?" he hissed, leaning across the table, his voice a frantic rasp. "Forget the trust. How much? Just name a price." And there it was, the twist. They had just moved the conversation from hiding a family scandal to committing conspiracy and bribery. They'd just admitted everything. I smiled, a real smile this time, though I'm sure it looked terrifying. The first rule of their family: Every problem has a price tag. How utterly boring. I slowly folded my napkin and placed it on the table. The silence was thick with the smell of their fear and my sea bass. I looked at Mark's panicked face and Eleanor's stone-cold fury. They still thought this was about punishing them for the affairs. They were playing checkers, and I was setting up a whole new game. "You're thinking too small, Mark," I said softly, my voice barely audible over the clinking glasses of the oblivious diners around us. I stood up. This was never about money. I looked down at them. Two trapped animals in a very expensive cage. You haven't even begun to understand what you've lost. I walked out of that restaurant and didn't look back. The cool night air felt like a reprieve, a cleansing of the soul. I didn't need to see their faces to know what they looked like. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. My single, casual mention of the observatory had been like a lit match in a fireworks factory. I hadn't shown them my hand. I had just shown them that I had a hand. And it was a winning one. They weren't dealing with a grieving idiot anymore. They were dealing with a threat of unknown magnitude. Driving home, I expected to feel triumphant, victorious. But what I felt was a strange, hollow quiet. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the cold reality of my situation. I hadn't exposed them. Not really. I just poked the hornet's nest with a stick. Now I had to be ready for the swarm. My phone buzzed about 20 times on the drive home. 6 calls from Mark, 8 from Eleanor. The rest were texts, a frantic stream of consciousness volley of threats, pleas, and accusations. What game are you playing? You are destroying this family. Call me back right now, you coward. Let's be reasonable, Dylan. It was like watching a cornered animal chew its own leg off. I didn't respond. Silence was now my most potent weapon. Back in the empty house, I poured myself a glass of tap water. The expensive Cabernet was still on my tongue, a cloying aftertaste of their corruption. My reflection in the kitchen window was a stranger, a tired man with old eyes. Who was I becoming? My original quest for simple truth, who are my daughters, had metastasized into this complex, ugly vendetta. This wasn't about a broken heart anymore. That was a clean wound, survivable. This was a sickness of the soul. And then there was Maya. Every step I took in this elaborate game of revenge, I was walking on a path paved with her innocence. Every move against Eleanor and Mark was a potential ricochet that could hit her. The trust they'd offer was a cage, a way to own her. But what was my alternative? To let them get away with it? To swallow the truth and live the rest of my life in their carefully constructed lie? The moral dilemma wasn't a philosophical exercise anymore. It was a monster under my bed. I retreated to my office, my bunker. I didn't need to look at Sophie's journals anymore. I had them memorized. Now, my research turned to Mark, his business, his online footprint. I was no longer looking for proof of the past. I was looking for vulnerabilities in the present. It turns out, when you know exactly what crime to look for, the evidence isn't that hard to find. I didn't need to hack anything. People like Mark are arrogant. They don't hide their tracks because they don't believe anyone is smart enough to follow them. Public records of his real estate group's LLCs. Archived news articles about the beach condo project. Social media posts from a construction foreman complaining about last-minute changes to structural supply orders. A foreman who just happened to work for one of my company's biggest rivals. Individually, they meant nothing. But when cross-referenced with the timeline from Sophie's journals and the bank deposits, the picture was so clear, so damning, it was breathtaking. I wasn't just connecting dots. I was drawing a hangman's noose. Mark hadn't just benefited from my company's leak data. He'd used it to short sell stocks of his material suppliers before announcing project delays. He hadn't just committed insider trading. He was playing the market like a rigged carnival game. This went far beyond their sad little family drama. The numbers involved were staggering. It was way out of my league. That was the twist I hadn't seen coming. My enemy wasn't the smarmy real estate agent from my nightmares. My enemy was bigger, colder. This level of financial manipulation, this was organized. It was structured. Mark was the sweaty, nervous face of it. But was he the architect? The reference in Sophie's journal to his dad, their dad, favoring her, it gnawed at me. whining about how Dad always favored me. It was a throwaway line, but now it felt like a clue. What if this wasn't just Mark and Sophie's scheme? What if this was a family tradition? The family business wasn't real estate. It was corruption. And Sophie wasn't just a player. She was a preferred agent, the favorite. My whole plan had been predicated on the idea that I was dealing with a couple of panicked amateurs trying to cover their tracks. But if this was deeper, if it was an established generational grift, then I wasn't just poking a hornet's nest. I had wandered into the territory of a predator far larger and more dangerous than I had imagined. And here I was, a suburban project manager with a set of diaries, trying to go to war with a machine. My phone rang again. It was a block number this time. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a notification popped up, an audio file. My finger trembled as I hit play. It wasn't Mark's frantic rasping or Eleanor's icy command. It was a man's voice, calm, deep, and unfamiliar. It had the smooth, confident tenor of old money and absolute authority. The kind of voice that doesn't need to be raised to be heard. Mr. Miller, the voice said, as if commenting on the weather, "My name is Arthur. I'm a friend of the family. I understand you've been going through a difficult time. Perhaps we could have a conversation. Mark and Eleanor are a bit too emotional for this sort of thing. They've made a mess of it. I'd like to help you find a more permanent solution." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The family had called in a specialist. The amateur hour was over. The game had just been taken out of my hands. And for the first time, a sliver of genuine, cold fear slipped through my armor. I was no longer the one pulling the strings. I was just a fly that had been caught in a web I didn't even know existed until it was too late. A permanent solution. The voice on the voicemail was like expensive bourbon, smooth, aged, and utterly intoxicatingly dangerous. It wasn't the voice of a thug. It was the voice of a boardroom, the sound of problems being quietly and efficiently erased. For a moment, the world shrank to the sterile hum of my phone. This was their endgame. Mark and Eleanor weren't the players. They were the hysterical, fumbling rookies on the team. And they just called in their Hall of Fame quarterback. My little psychodrama had just gone pro. There was no negotiation to be had over the phone. A man like that, a man whose job title is probably something like Senior Vice President of Making Things Go Away, doesn't do business via text. He does it face to face. So I did the only thing I could. I took control of the venue. I sent a text, not to the blocked number, but to Eleanor. "I'll talk to your friend. At my house. Tomorrow, noon. He comes alone." It was a bluff, asserting a power I didn't have. But in this game, perception is everything. The battle would be fought on my turf. My quiet, suburban, meticulously lawned turf. I spent the next 12 hours not in fear, but in furious preparation. My weapon wasn't a gun. It was information architecture. I created a dead man switch. A series of encrypted emails containing digitized copies of journals, the bank statements, the spreadsheet connecting Sophie's meetings to my company's bids, and a full narrative of the situation. Each email was addressed to a different recipient. The managing partner of a top newspaper, the SEC's Enforcement Division, and the CEO of my company's biggest competitor, all scheduled to be sent from a dozen different ghost servers in 48 hours unless I manually entered a deactivation code every 12 hours. It was the digital equivalent of strapping a bomb to my chest. Maybe you can take me out, but you're coming with me. It was a wasted, wired night, fueled by stale coffee and a primal need to survive. He arrived at precisely noon. A man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a simple, dark suit. He didn't look like a fixer. He looked like a history professor or a board member of the local orchestra. He carried a leather briefcase. His name was Arthur, and he had the calm, placid eyes of a shark. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He sat on my beige sofa, the same sofa Sophie had picked out, and appraised my living room. "This is a lovely home, Mr. Miller." Sophie always did have impeccable taste. His voice was a physical presence in the room. "It's a house," I said. "Taste is debatable." Arthur smiled faintly. "Let's dispense with the unpleasantries, shall we? You've stumbled into a family matter that is complex. Generations of complexity. Eleanor and Mark are sentimentalists. They're driven by emotion. I'm a pragmatist. I am here to offer you a new reality. He opened his briefcase. Inside, there wasn't a weapon. There were papers. Documents. This is not about money, Arthur said, anticipating my cynical retort. This is about stability. For you and for the girls, a clean slate. We transfer this house fully into your name. We create an irrevocable, untouchable trust for Lillian and Maya that will fund their every need for the rest of their lives. Education, homes, everything. In return, you will give me the original journals and any copies you may have made, and you will move on. You will live a quiet, comfortable, and undisturbed life. He was offering to give me back the life I thought I had, but financed by the lie itself, a gilded cage. And if I don't, I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Here came the final, gut-wrenching twist of the knife, the one that rewrote the entire story. Arthur sighed, a sound of genuine weariness. Mr. Miller, you made the classic mistake of assuming you understand the narrative. You think Sophie was a villain. She wasn't. She was a soldier. A reluctant one, perhaps, but a soldier in a very old war. Did you ever wonder why her father left the bulk of his holdings in a trust she controlled? Not his son? Mark is a fool. A greedy, emotional child. Sophie was brilliant, but she was trapped. She hated this business. Hated every grimy second of it. My mind refused to process it. What are you talking about? Those payments from Mark? Arthur said, his eyes locking onto mine. That wasn't her price. That was the money she was skimming, siphoning it off from her own family for years, building an escape fund, a fund to take her daughters and disappear, to run from me, from Eleanor, from all of it. He leaned forward slightly. And Maya, you think her conception was a cheap, random affair? It was a lifeline, a desperate act to create a child who had no biological link to our family. A child she hoped would be free of the taint. A child she anchored to you, the one good man she'd ever met. She didn't betray you, Mr. Miller. In her own twisted, tragic way, she was trying to choose you. The air left my lungs. The entire edifice of my cold, righteous fury crumbled into dust. Sophie wasn't a monster. She was a prisoner, planning a jailbreak that never came. The cancer got there first. All her lies, her manipulations, they were just desperate moves in a game where she'd been a pawn since birth. Her journals weren't a catalog of sins. They were a cry for help written in invisible ink. The true symbol of our story wasn't her infidelity. It was her hope chest, a place where she had both the innocent memories of our daughters and the secret notebooks that were meant to be her ticket to freedom. My carefully constructed revenge, my brilliant strategy, it all felt so small, so misguided. But the threat was still there. Arthur, the family, the machine. I took a deep breath, the taste of ash in my mouth. My own play was my only play. The journals and the copies are already gone, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. They're in the digital wind, tied to my heartbeat. If I go away, if anything happens to me or my girls, the whole story blows wide open. Your family matter becomes front-page news. Arthur stared at me for a long time. The shark's eyes calculated, assessed. He saw the truth. He saw the stalemate. Clever, he finally said, with no animosity. It was a statement of professional respect, mutually assured destruction, a Cold War. I don't want a war, I said. I just want to be left alone, to raise my daughters. My voice cracked on the last word. My daughters. He slowly closed his briefcase. The deal was off. A new one had been forged. He stood up. The terms of the trust will be honored, with no strings attached. You will find us to be silent partners in your children's future. We will never bother you again. In return, your data cache will remain dormant. The war will remain cold. He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. For what it's worth, she really did love you. You were her only hope for a different life. I suppose in the end you were... Then he was gone. I stood in the absolute silence of my house. A home built on lies, paid for by tragedy, now a fortress secured by a digital bomb. I didn't win. Nobody won. We just negotiated a permanent truce in an unwinnable war. I picked up a framed photo from a mantelpiece. Lily and Maya, laughing, arms around each other. One was my blood. The other was a legacy of a woman I had loved, hated, and it turned out never really known at all. It didn't matter. 0%. 99%. They were just numbers. I was their father. That was the only truth left standing. My revenge was over. My real life's work, raising these two girls in the quiet rubble of their mother's war, was just beginning.